The PS5 Pro is a gaming console that is very hard to love, even when it does deliver some impressive results. Because ultimately, I know that in buying this thing, I was spending a substantial sum of money on a device that essentially serves the same basic function as the regular, cheaper PS5. I didn't personally need a new console because I already owned a launch model PS5 that worked just fine, but I had plenty of good reasons to upgrade too, some of which have been fully justified and some of which regrettably haven't, as a result of some frustrating quirks. Ever since deciding to acquire this black and white contraption, I have steered clear of most reviews and online discourse, because I wanted to experience buying and owning a PS5 Pro and form my own opinion before diving into the conversation around it. As much as I love hearing how and why people hate or love such things, I'm always fearful of excessive negativity or positivity influencing my experience, even when I make every effort to ignore extreme examples. If I see gameplay comparisons that show issues with the PS5 Pro's output, then I could suddenly start focusing on those issues when I might never have noticed them otherwise. And if I see footage that makes the PS5 Pro's gameplay look ridiculously good, then I could end up disappointed when it isn't as impressive in person. Or I might awkwardly try to convince myself that it really actually does look that good though, actually. When I buy something, I do so wanting to have a good experience with that product, but not necessarily expecting to. I wanted to give the Pro PS5 a fair shake, and I wanted it to impress me, but I had no idea if it actually would. I was never worried about buyer's remorse, and I didn't feel the need to convince myself that it was a worthwhile purchase, because I had no qualms about simply selling the console on if I decided it wasn't for me. I hoped it would be though, because it seemed like I was the exact target audience. Someone who likes their games to look as good as possible, but doesn't ideally want to leave the console ecosystem. I'll always be a console gamer at heart, and for what it's worth, I'm also a console gamer with legitimately zero allegiances. There have been times in my life where I've only had an Xbox and times where I've only had a PlayStation, but in the end I've always found a way to play most of the hits on both sides, and I've probably spent roughly equal gaming time with each brand. I'm lucky enough at the moment to have the current Xbox and the PlayStation, and I'm glad for the options that gives me without having to play on PC. Because as much as I might respect the PC master race, I will always prefer putting in a disc and gaming from the sofa on a big TV. Since its debut in 2020, I've been an active PS5 user, and now I'm an active PS5 Pro user. I've lived with this console, I've played games on it, I've vacuumed up around it, I've nursed it back to health after a power cut, and I've inserted and ejected too many discs to count. Probably about 8 or 9, actually. Although, for the sake of transparency, I should say that I haven't tested Concord out yet. The PS5 Pro and I have had some good times and some bad times, but in the end I don't regret picking it up. So, in order to explain why that is, I'm going to talk in some detail about the way games really look and feel on the device, as well as the stark realities of owning a professional PlayStation 5. Plus, you can expect some tangentially related ranting along the way. And at the end of it all, we might hopefully reach a point where we finally understand the true value of the PS5 Pro.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
I don't think I can ever forgive you for that.
On the PS5 Pro's launch day, there was one very immediate and obvious problem that anyone who'd purchased the console faced. There was no new showstopper game to play. While the original release of the PS5 had Miles Morales and Demon's Souls to keep players occupied, there was no big release to accompany the Pro model. There were several recent PS5 exclusives with Pro enhanced patches and many third-party upgrades too, but there was and arguably still is no obvious game to show off the power of Sony's Pro console. And while that certainly makes it harder to assess the full potential of the device, it does make it easy to develop a broader evaluation of the PS5 Pro's abilities in enhanced games, from the lowest effort patches to the most well implemented boosts. That said, while most of the gameplay footage shown in this video will be from the PS5 Pro except where noted, I'm not going to attempt to tell you how and why it is specifically better than the base PS5 in every game, because such academic comparisons are best left to the experts in gaming technology. Instead, then, I hope to impart exactly how it has felt to play these games day to day, having played them regularly on the base PS5 first, while discussing how the visual difference across these titles impacts the experience for a player like myself who, above all else, wants to be immersed in a game rather than fixating on the details. From the outset, I think the key thing to remember with every PS5 Pro enhanced game is that many of them look pretty good on the base PS5 already, and none of them look completely terrible. Arguably, video games in general have at least had the potential to look and run about as well as most could hope for since the PS4, Xbox One generation. So bearing in mind that the leap from PS4 to PS5 in terms of graphical fidelity wasn't nearly as noticeable as with previous next-gen console launches, the leap from PS5 to Pro was always going to be relatively minimal. Even putting aside the fact that this Pro upgrade has to stay in line with the original PS5 tech to ensure compatibility, we've simply reached a point where the diminishing returns from incremental spec upgrades are becoming painfully obvious. After expecting the PS5 Pro to be a minimal upgrade though, I was legitimately surprised by the differences I noticed when comparing a few games. The best, most straightforward way I can describe my experience of changing PS5s is this. Since upgrading to the Pro model, the vast majority of the visual issues that I had with the specific games I was playing in my specific setup have disappeared. Now, there are some caveats and a variety of situational factors to add to that, but in general, the PS5 Pro has simply made it slightly easier for me to enjoy games without distracting visual quirks. This is just one man's perspective, and certainly I am aware there are several games which have ended up looking basically the same or somehow even worse, but that has not been the case with anything I've played. In the week or so before I upgraded, the game that I was playing by far the most of was Dragon Age: The Veilguard. After spending dozens of hours in the world of Thedas, I had a very good idea of how the game looked, ran, and felt on the base PS5, along with its various issues, giving me the best possible experiential foundation to notice the differences when I opened the game on my PS5 Pro. And here's the thing. I later learned that the Veilguard's PS5 Pro mode was considered one of the less impressive upgrades available at launch. But when I launched my PS5 save file on the Pro console, I noticed an immediate and striking difference in the look of the game across the board. Playing in the performance mode as I primarily was on the base PS5, the game appeared dramatically sharper to my eyes. It was equivalent to swapping from an HD copy of a film to a 4K version. Rather than a soft, unstable image, I had a crystal clear view into the Age of Dragons, which which made my next few hours with the game feel like a vastly improved experience. Beyond that resolution increase, one of the most recurrent issues I had with the Veilguard on PS5 was clothing textures not loading and looking very ugly in cutscenes as a result. And that was another key thing that, for whatever reason, was almost completely absent for me playing on PS5 Pro. Having said all that though, I did of course very quickly adjust to the Veilguard's new and improved visuals. I wouldn't have wanted to go back, but I also knew that the benefits of the Pro console were very quickly becoming the accepted standard for me. After Dragon Age, I played some Stellar Blade and The Last of Us Part 2. Both games I had also been testing on the base model prior to upgrading to help get a sense of the changes. And in both cases, again, I was fairly impressed. For The Last of Us, it seemed the upgrade was mostly just a resolution bump, but in Stellar Blade, the image overall felt significantly cleaner and more detailed. I don't claim to have any special knowledge with regards to visual breakup and artifacts in games, but I do often notice these issues when I'd rather not. And Stellar Blade certainly has problems on the base PS5. In the game's Pro upgrade though, with PSSR, I didn't have any issues with the visual presentation, and the game runs incredibly smoothly. And that to me is all that you could possibly ask for. After experiencing Stellar Blade's Pro enhanced upgrade, I did once again adjust pretty quickly to the benefits. However you are able to play a game, it's possible to adjust to the quality you're getting, so long as said game is good and the performance isn't totally dreadful. But it definitely makes things easier when everything looks good and runs without issue. I have a great deal of respect for the technical wizards who make games work, and I'm casually interested in certain aspects of the technical minutiae. But when I actually sit down to play a game, I just want to be immersed in that world and ideally avoid thinking about the technical stuff. The only thing that I really need is for the visuals and performance to be coherent and consistent, regardless of art style or genre. And back when I played on the PS1, 2, 3 and 4, I rarely had any complaints. But this generation, I have found myself encountering more and more graphical issues with modern games on modern consoles. And I think there's a few key reasons why. The first is simply a greater awareness of these visual problems, both for me personally and gamers in general. The brilliant minds at Digital Foundry, among others, have in recent years shone a much brighter light on the technical side of gaming for a much wider audience. And while I think that's a very good thing overall, that increased knowledge of the behind the scenes stuff does have a knock-on effect on the way people experience such games. After someone has pointed out low-quality reflections in a random game's water, then it's likely I'll start to fixate on those reflections, even though I might never have noticed that issue on my own. I tend to seek out such visual breakdowns only after I've played a game for exactly that reason. But either way, an increased awareness of the technical side of gaming has a wider impact too. Another big factor to consider is the increased dedication to realistic visuals in modern games. Developers have probably wanted to create photorealistic games for as long as games have been around, and I'm personally all for it. But the closer a game comes to achieving verisimilitude, the more the defects like weird lighting and uncanny valley faces do stand out. When a game like current day Cyberpunk 2077 looks so good, it's hard to ignore its rare imperfections. Whereas the blurry, lower fidelity, photorealistic worlds like GTA 5 on the Xbox 360 always felt entirely cohesive. The third big thing that has impacted the prominence of visual issues in games, I think, is the increased adoption of big, beautiful 4K screens. When I think back to my early experiences in the Xbox One and PS4 generation playing Rise Son of Rome or Killzone Shadowfall, I remember struggling to imagine how games could possibly ever look any better. And then I remember that I was playing those games on an HD plasma screen sat 10 feet away, and it becomes clear to me just how much my current setup has impacted my gaming experience. I'm lucky enough to have a 4K screen which I sit pretty close to when gaming, and for all intents and purposes I consider it to be basically the perfect setup. But modern games are so demanding and modern consoles simply aren't powerful enough to output true 4K most of the time, which means that my high resolution screen is regularly demonstrating graphical issues more clearly than an HD screen would, as well as giving a more detailed image. With all that in mind, then, it's clear why I've noticed a lot more visual issues this generation, even with some of the best looking games of all time coming out. So when the PS5 Pro arrived on the scene, my hope was that it would solve the problem. And even though it hasn't been a revelation, it has succeeded to a worthwhile degree. I almost think that if I hadn't upgraded from a PS5 to a PS5 Pro, I would have felt just as much of a difference in terms of visual consistency by downgrading from a 4K TV to an HD one, or even just sitting further away from the TV. But anyway, aside from Stellar Blade, Dragon Age, and Ellie and Abby's excellent adventure, I've also tested out Dead Island 2, Ratchet & Clank, Baldur's Gate 3, Miles Morales, Dying Light 2, Assassin's Creed Mirage, Fortnite, and Horizon Forbidden West. I've spent varying amounts of time with them all, and again, I've mostly been happy with what I've seen. None of these games look wholly different, but they are all better. They might not necessarily blow your mind, but they do leave you with far fewer complaints. Both of the zombie sequel games felt perfect to play, and so too did the non-LEGO Horizon sequel, the Assassin sequel, and both of the Insomniac sequels. And it's at this point that I've realised that Stellar Blade is the only game that I've thoroughly tested that isn't a sequel. Baldur's Gate 3 is the game I probably had the most issues with, but considering how much trouble I had playing that game on the base PS5, it was a definite improvement. Fortnite's ray tracing upgrade makes a huge difference in that game too, and arguably has a much greater impact on the overall look than the PSSR upscaled performance modes elsewhere. In A/B comparisons with horribly compressed footage, better lighting, shadows, and reflections on the Pro always look more impressive than a resolution bump, but I still firmly believe that improving the consistency and integrity of the image is more important in practice. Take this example. I know that Alan Wake 2 is a dramatically more detailed and beautiful game than Alan Wake 1, as well as being an all-round masterpiece. But the issues with reflections and shimmer and image breakup on consoles meant that it was a significantly less graphically coherent experience for me than the first game. Obviously, Xbox 360 graphics aren't as impressive as the output from modern consoles, but at a lower resolution with a more basic presentation and on a smaller screen, Alan Wake looked pretty great. And it's a bit of a shame really that its sequel requires the PS5 Pro to deliver a comparably unimpeded experience. As good as most of the current PS5 Pro enhanced games might be at delivering an improved experience, it's critical to note that its future value will be entirely decided by the quality of future PS5 Pro upgrades. For many players, it would make sense in theory to wait and see if a big game like GTA 6 utilizes the full power of the PS5 Pro's hardware, but at the same time, the best way to get maximum value out of this mid-gen refresh is to buy as early as possible. Even though there aren't any show-stopping Pro-enhanced games out now, you will at least get a variably better experience with anything you were going to play anyway. I didn't personally buy a PS4 Pro or an Xbox One X when they released because I didn't have a 4K TV to justify that upgrade. And by the time I did, I felt I was better off saving up for the next-gen consoles instead. Probably the best use of anyone's gaming fund is buying more games rather than buying more consoles. But if you think you see the value in the PS5 Pro, I can confirm that it usually does what it says on the tin. But there are maybe just a few more major caveats.
Ugh, bag of Camara. Well, get on with it. You saved me, now you'll extort me. That's how this works, yes?
From the very first reveal of the PS5 Pro, it was obvious that it was going to be a very niche product. It's an expensive variant of a device that is already a luxury item, so obviously nobody needs a PS5 Pro, as much as it does serve a very real purpose for a small group of people. Even those who want to buy or have bought a PS5 Pro would likely agree though that it is a fair bit too expensive, especially outside of the US, where the variability in pricing makes it difficult to discuss the degree of value on offer. In the UK, this thing costs £700, which is around $900 in the US, where it costs $700 plus tax. When I bought my PS5 Pro, I was able to get a 20% discount which brought it down closer to the US price. Though even then, it seemed like a very expensive device for the console market to me. Several retailers began slightly reducing the price only a month or so after release, and it seems entirely possible that we'll see further price reductions in the future. Though I wouldn't expect anything drastic, since I'm pretty sure that Sony still want to make some money here. Also, even though $700 is very expensive for a gaming console, I don't think that it's beyond ridiculous when you break down the hardware you're actually getting in its nice shiny package. You definitely could put together a PC that performs better with some savvy purchases, but if you specifically want a better gaming console, the PS5 Pro is your only option, and I don't think it's quite as unreasonably priced as it could be. If you think about the PS5 like it's a PC and consider how you might spend $300 to upgrade that low-end gaming rig, then the resulting Pro console is a decent improvement in quite a few ways. Chiefly, you're looking at a souped-up GPU along with a bit more memory and 2 TB of installed storage instead of 1, which feels like a legitimate luxury that could easily account for a third of that upgrade budget if installed separately. If you've already added more storage to your PS5, it's less significant, but I have personally put off doing so and continually deleted and reinstalled games instead. Now that I have 2 TB of storage though, I feel pretty spoilt for gigabytes and doubt I could ever go back. In addition to each of these upgrades, there is also the tech enabling better ray tracing and PSSR. And while I can't speak much to the specific upsides and downsides of PSSR, the results are mostly impressive to my eye. And as the tech continues to evolve, the PS5 Pro's exclusive use of this upscaler could become increasingly valuable. If, like me, you refuse to move on from physical media, then the ability to buy and sell games on discs remains an advantage of the console ecosystem too. Obviously, it's annoying that you have to buy the disc drive separately, but I'll get back to that later. While the PlayStation digital storefront makes games embarrassingly expensive when compared to the options available on PC, I have regularly bought games at launch on disc and sold them on a few weeks later for 80% of what I originally paid. as well as sharing games back and forth with family and friends, which is an option that PC gamers simply do not have. Not because they don't have any friends necessarily, but because you rarely see PC games on discs these days. I have also bought many disc games, new and second-hand, for significantly less than they're sold digitally. So if you like the best graphics possible but still want to use discs, then this console is your best option. But it's going to cost you a premium, because it is a premium product, even if it doesn't always feel like it. Ultimately, I know that what matters most is that the PS5 Pro delivers a proportionally improved gaming experience for your money. But I can't help but wish that Sony had put more effort into making it feel like a luxury product too. Because the launch model PS5 honestly felt more deluxe to me at the time it released at its notably lower price. I should confess that I have never particularly loved the aesthetic of the original PS5, but I do respect the guts it took to release such a weird looking device. And in 2020, the process of unboxing and setting up that heavy, imposing beast was quite an experience. The packaging was fairly basic, but it did come with a rare at the time HDMI 2.1 cable and an arguably over-engineered stand that worked whether you wanted your console to be horizontal or vertical. Then, when you turned on the PS5 for the first time, you were greeted with a new, beautifully refined and vibrant interface, and the pre-installed mini game experience Astro's Playroom, which was and still is an excellent introduction to the PS5. Compare that experience with the unboxing and setup of the PS5 Pro and it's pretty clear there was little effort made to distinguish the two devices. The packaging is just as basic and uninspired, and if the launch PS5 stand was over-engineered, then these stupid plastic legs were barely engineered at all. I mean, seriously. I know these have been the standard since the Slim model, but they're genuinely dreadful. The rubbery edge is the nicest touch, I guess, but fundamentally these don't look good or work well. Every time I go to turn on my PlayStation 5 Pro or eject a disc, I can feel those awful plastic legs crumbling under the weight of its debatable number of teraflops. It just doesn't keep the thing steady, and the longer legs with the disc drive are even worse than the default ones. At least if you keep your console vertical, you can buy a nice stand, as outrageous as that is, but this is the only official option if you're going horizontal like I am. I just strongly feel that if you're going to build an expensive console that only has one flat side and is otherwise shaped like an architecture student's final project, then you should also include a proper solution for situating that console in the home. Beyond that rant about plastic legs though, the entire experience of setting up the PS5 Pro just feels a bit disappointing. If this isn't your first PS5, because booting up the device feels almost identical to the original. There is an optional new dynamic PS5 Pro background, which is something, but not a lot, as the rest of the interface is the exact same. And that's fine, I guess, but just a little bit underwhelming, because once you're set up, it feels exactly the same as using the normal PS5. There are so many things that Sony could have done here, both big and expensive and cheap and easy, that could have vastly improved the experience of buying and owning the PS5 Pro. Some unique Pro UI elements and sound effects, or an entirely new and exclusive theme would have been relatively easy to implement, and those little changes could have subtly transformed the whole experience. Why not throw a huge PS5 Pro logo in the corner of the screen and put a shiny gold banner around every game that's Pro enhanced? Honestly, there's very little to distinguish the enhanced and unenhanced games on the console right now, and there really should be. It's such a small thing that would make such a big difference. If they were willing to go a bit further than that though, why not include a unique design for the controller? print the PS5 Pro logo on the back and put some racing stripes on the touchpad. Even a pre-existing color like the all black controller being included would have felt that bit more premium and cool, while surely not adding much to the production costs. To be honest, I think they should have made the whole thing black to help distinguish its default appearance beyond just adding extra black lines down the center, but I know that that would cut into their sales of colorful swappable plates, so I understand why they didn't. Some cheap additional accessories couldn't have hurt either. The incredible and annoyingly limited 30th anniversary PS5 bundle should have been the model for how to do this. You really cannot underestimate the value of fancy cable ties and stickers as throw-ins. I'm not kidding when I say that it would have cost almost nothing and made a lot of people very happy if they just included a flimsy plastic card that said something like PS5 Pro owner or Extreme to the max PlayStation fan, with some fancy shiny printing and a unique barcode to unlock a special online badge. It's just about making the consumer feel like they're being treated with a degree of respect by the company they're handing over a ton of money to. Obviously, I would have preferred a more premium unboxing experience too, but ultimately, given how quickly that goes by, I'm more interested in the changes that would have made owning the console feel more exciting. Aside from all that though, maybe the most obvious thing that they should have included as standard is the flippin' disk drive. I'd love to see the statistics on how many PS5 Pro owners do and don't have the disk drive attached, because I know at least a few people are specifically holding off on buying a PS5 Pro until they can find a disk drive to go with it, since they have consistently been very difficult to find, at least in Europe. The people who want this console seem like they're almost all also the people who want to put discs in their machine, and having to buy the drive separately makes the Pro feel even more ridiculously expensive, even if it quickly pays for itself with the cheaper prices of physical games. All of the petty complaints that I have about the PS5 Pro do make a difference, but the truth is that none of them would have impacted the perceived value of the console nearly as much if it had released with a game-changing game and a clear roadmap of equally exciting Pro-enhanced titles. This has certainly been a bit of a weird and underwhelming console generation so far, even with the huge variety of fantastic games that have released. After their failed live service push, Sony's future slate of games in particular seems pretty lackluster at the moment. But there is still more than enough to look forward to from them and third-party developers. If nothing else, there is always Grand Theft Auto 6 on the horizon. At the end of the day, I think my purchase of the PS5 Pro will be worth it so long as even a single person out there on the internet finds some value in something I had to say in this video. Even though it's far from perfect, I am genuinely happy to have this contraption sitting beneath the TV in the living room, and providing me with some variably improved visuals in a variety of the games I love now and seek to enjoy in the future. But what do you think of the PS5 Pro? Whether you own one, plan to buy one, or know that you probably never will. Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more gaming. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.